Expansion in network of trade and urbanization. Objectives. After reading this unit, you will be able to learn how items of trade were acquired or manufactured, how trade was conducted and organized, which were the major trade routes in North India, about the important urban centers that developed, about the commercial contacts between India and other countries, and the position of traders in society. Introduction. In block number 4, you learned how developments in the later Vedic period led to the growth of cities in the 6th century BC. These early cities were located either on the banks of the Ganga or on its major tributaries, which were used for communication. A majority of them were political centers and capitals of the early monarchical kingdoms. Some of them had mud ramparts and earthen embankments, but by and large, they were unplanned settlements. Archaeological excavations at these early sites have been few and have failed to reveal any evidence of early monument. It is not until the Mauryan period, when the capital was shifted from Rajgriha to Pataliputra, that there are traces of monumental architecture. As compared to these early beginnings, the pace of urbanization accelerated in the post-Mauryan period. The number of cities increased, and these now combined political and commercial functions. There was a greater use of brick, both for residential structures as well as for fortifications and public buildings. It is also at this time that imposing religious movements were built and embellished. Similarly, trade activities were carried out primarily in essential commodities such as salt, metals, etc. The early trade routes gained more importance under the Mauryas. There were two reasons for this. Gold, gems, and diamonds mined in the Deccan and transported along trade routes were required to sustain the royal treasury. The state derived revenue by taxing the traders and hence encouraged trading activity. The revenue from trade and agriculture was necessary to pay for the administrative machinery and the military maintained by the state. We also know that trade was carried on along land routes as well as by sea. During the Mauryan period, maritime trade was carried on mainly along the coast. The ports along the west coast were probably those of Bharuch at the mouth of the Narmada and Sopara near present-day Bombay. In the east, Tamarlipti or present-day Tamluk provided an important outlet for ships sailing to Burma. We shall now see how these land and sea routes expanded around the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. Geographical background. In this unit, we shall discuss the developments that took place in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. The dividing line for this purpose will be the Vindhya range. Thus, the Deccan will be largely outside the scope of this unit. Some aspects of the geographical features are significant from a historical point of view. The two major river systems that dominate the northern part of the Indian subcontinent are those of the Indus and the Ganga. The Ganga river system is very different from that of the Indus, and this has influenced the location and growth of settlements in the north. The Ganga rises in the Himalayas, and in its journey to the Bay of Bengal, it receives the waters of many tributaries along the way. These tributaries such as Yamuna, Gomati, Ghagra, Gandak, etc. add to the flow of water in the Ganga, with the result that even in the summer months, enough water is available for irrigation and agriculture. The southwest monsoon brings rainfall mainly to the middle and lower Ganga valley, and the region is fertile and capable of supporting large populations. Not only is the Ganga valley agriculturally productive, but the river itself is also navigable along its length. From ancient times, there has been regular traffic of men and commodities of the Ganga, and the river has been the lifeline of the north, connecting the cities of the northwest with those near the coast. As against this, the Indus receives very little rainfall from the southwest monsoon. Its main tributaries, the Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Satluj, Beas, join it in the Punjab, making the region fertile. But for the rest of its coast to the Arabian Sea, the Indus flows mainly through the desert, constantly losing water in the process. This has considerably reduced the usefulness of the river for agricultural production as well as for navigation. Thus, as expected, the major cities of the north were located along the Ganga. Another factor that has been crucial in the location of passes in the Himalayan range. These passes have been important for the movement of trade commodities into India as well as for forging links between India and Central Asia. We shall see later in this unit how routes once established were used not only for commercial purposes but also for the spread of religion. Political framework. A review of the political situation in North India is essential as it is linked to one of the questions that we shall discuss later in this unit. Who controlled trade? Was it controlled by kings and rulers, or was it in hands of traders and merchants? You have seen earlier that under the Mauryas the center of power was Magध, but with the decline of the Mauryan dynasty, Magध lost its prime position and many centers of power developed in the subsequent period. The Ganga Valley, especially Magध, continued to be ruled by the Sanghas and later by the Kanvas till the beginning of the Christian era. In the northwest were the Indo-Greek kings, whose history is known mainly from coins issued by them. Their rule came to an end with attacks by nomadic tribes from Central Asia. The first of these were the Sakas and the Parthians. The second was by the Yuezhi tribes. They established themselves in Kabul and Kashmir and started the line of Kushan kings. The most important Kushan ruler was Kanishk I, though the exact dates of his rule are still debated. The capital of the Kushanas was Purushapura, near the modern Peshawar, while Mathura had the status of almost the second capital. Their kingdom stretched as far east as Varanasi and as far south as Sanchi. Under Kanishk, close links were established with Central Asia and China, and overland trade with these regions prospered. In addition to the major dynasties of the Sakas, Parthians and Kushanas in the North India, there were a large number of local chiefs who ruled in various pockets. Coins were issued by many of these chiefdoms located in Punjab and Rajasthan. Nearly 175 types of coins have been counted dating back from the late 2nd century BC to the early 4th century AD. Similarly, a large number of local issues known as Puri Kushan coins have been found at sites in the lower Ganga Valley and the Odisha coast. We can then say that North and South Western India were ruled by several major and minor dynasties. As a result, the land routes must have passed through many different kingdoms. Each ruler perhaps levied taxes on the sale of merchandise at certain centers. Merchants by and large were provided protection and trade was encouraged. Expansion of trade and production of commodities. One of the questions that arises is, what were the reasons responsible for the increase in the trading activity in the post-modern period? There is no single answer as there were many reasons for this increase. Many reasons for this increase. Agriculture was now generating enough surplus. It had created such social classes which required varieties of items that could be acquired only through trade. Agricultural produce was itself now an item of trade because the majority of the people living in cities did not produce their own food. Both Buddhism and Jainism, which had a large following by now, encouraged the accumulation and reinvestment of wealth, and trade was one of the occupations held in high regard. Hence, we find that there was a close relationship between the traders and the Buddhist Sangha, and Buddhist monastic establishments were located at important points along trade routes. The expansion of urban centers meant that there was a growing class of consumers for subsistence as well as luxury goods. Together with these internal factors was an increased demand from outside for various Indian goods. Two major empires that arose at this time were the Roman Empire in the west and the later Han Empire in China. Within the Roman Empire, there was greater demand for products of the east such as spices, aromatic woods, etc. Similarly, the rulers of the later Han Empire adopted an encouraging approach towards merchants, and this resulted in an acceleration of contacts between India, Central Asia and China. In the section of trade routes, we shall discuss how inland trading circuits linked up with external networks, but first we should analyze the evidence for craft production at this time. A large number of inscriptions have been found at Buddhist sites all over the country. These inscriptions record donations and gifts made to the Buddhist Sangha, but at the same time, they also indicate the prosperity of certain professions and occupational groups. Thus, the inscriptions at Mathura refer to several categories of merchants such as Vanik, Sarthavaha and Shreshti, and to occupations of the goldsmith, jeweler, treasurer, iron merchant, etc. In addition, there are references to guilds, one of them being identified as the Floor Makers Guild. Information about craftsmen and guilds is also available in early Buddhist literature as well as the Arthashastra of Kautilya. There are references to specialized groups living together in certain villages. For example, the Jatakas mention a border village in Kasi where a number of carpenters lived and merchants regularly visited the village for trade. Another way of procuring goods was by visiting the ports. When a ship arrived in port, merchants converged there to buy the goods and often had to pay money in advance to secure a share in the cargo. According to the Arthashastra, some of the craftsmen worked independently with apprentices, while others were organized into guilds. Inscriptions refer to donations made by these craftsmen, and archaeological excavations provide us with actual specimens of their handiwork. Weaving was prominently represented among the crafts, and cotton textiles were exported from India. There were many centers of textile production in the north, including Mathura and Varanasi. One of the donations at Mathura was by the wife of a dyer. Other categories of craftsmen included jewelers, perfumers, and ironmongers. Actual finds of beds and other ornaments are prolific at early historic sites. We have already referred to Ujjain as बीच की लाइन मिस हो गई है स्टोन्स, ग्लास, आइवरी एंड टेराकोटा, एंड these were in great demand from several centers in north. Workers in ivory figure in the inscription at Sancheri, and exquisite example of ivory working have fortunately been preserved. A hoard of ivory figurines was recovered during the excavations at the site of Begram or ancient Kapisa in Afghanistan. Thus we find that a diverse range of commodities were involved in trade at this time. These include luxury items such as ivories, jewelry and beds, pearls, diamonds, and other precious stones, as well as items of regular use such as cloth, agricultural products, and iron objects. No doubt, many of these were also exported, and we shall deal with them separately in a later section. Wine was perhaps another item of trade. The Arthashastra deals in great deal with the production of fermented juices, and its popularity is confirmed by the depiction of drinking scenes in the sculptures of the period, particularly from sites like Sanghol and Mathura. Internal trade. While literary sources such as the Milind Panu and the Jatakas provide information on the organization of trade networks, further confirmation comes from archaeological artifacts such as coins, seals, and sealings. The Milind Panu was written about the beginning of the Christian era. The original text is now lost, and the present work is a Pali translation of a copy made at a very early date in Sri Lanka. Also written in Pali, the Jatakas are 500 in number and narrate stories connected with the previous births of the Buddha. At the same time, they provide a vivid account of the social and economic conditions of the period. From the carvings on the Buddhist monuments, we know that many of these stories were known by the 1st century BC. The Jatakas show that there were many different types of commercial transactions and many ways in which the price of a commodity was fixed. For example, horses, elephants, and gems were used mainly by the ruling classes, and their price was fixed by a valuer. Present in the court. The best horses came from the West Asia and Central Asia. These were transported and sold by specialized merchants referred to as horse dealers in the early Pali and Sanskrit texts. Traders were organized into guilds. Others traded with their own money, while still others were only financiers and provided the money to trade with. The terms used for these different types of merchants also varied. A Vanik was primarily a general trader, while a Sethi was a financier, and a Sarthava was a leader of a caravan, which transported goods over long distances. In addition to these literary references is the evidence of seals, sealings, and coins. A seal is a stamp either inscribed with the name of its owner or with some symbol, while its impressions on any material is called sealing. Sealings are made in a variety of materials such as stone, ivory, copper, or lead, and were used both as identification marks as well as for securing merchandise. In the case of goods, the merchandise was first fastened with strings or rope, and over the knot a lump of moist clay was applied and then stamped with the seal. The clay was then dried either in the sun or by applying indirect heat. These clay sealings with string marks on the back have been found extensively at archaeological sites in the north. A good indicator of trade transactions is the coinage system. In the Mauryan period, silver punch marked coins were in use together with uninscribed cast copper coins. In the post-modern period, the variety, number, and types of coins being minted increased rapidly. Inscriptions were introduced on coins, and the technique of minting coins showed great improvement. Several thousand molds for casting copper coins dating to 100 BC have been found at different localities such as Khokra in district Rohtak, Sunet in district Ludhiana, Takshila and Sanchi. Nearly 200 types of copper coins were issued by the local dynasties and Gan Sanghas of North India. The Indo-Greeks in the northwest introduced a splendid series of portrait coinage, a type that was followed in India for several centuries. These coins in silver and copper carried bilingual inscriptions written on one side Greek language and script and on the other in Prakrit and generally in Khroshti script. In Western India, the coins of the Kshatraps are important because these show the earliest use of the Saka era, which henceforth provides a firm basis for dating. Another remarkable coin series of the early centuries AD is that of the Kushanas. In addition to those in copper, the Kushanas minted a large number of gold coins, and these depict a variety of Indian, Greek, and Iranian deities. This abundance of coin types and coinage system indicates the extensive use of money. The Arthashastra refers to the wages being paid in money, while the Jatakas mention goods being purchased against securities and traders borrowing money against bonds. We also know that guilds accepted money deposits and paid an interest on these, as mentioned in an inscription at Mathura. Together with the indigenous coins, foreign coins, especially Roman coins, also came into the country by way of trade. Very few Roman coins have been found in the north, though imitations of these in clay, known as bullae, occur widely at the excavated sites. Many of these bullae have a loop for threading and were probably used as ornaments. External trade. We have mentioned earlier that maritime trade started during the modern period. The early links flourished and extended in the early centuries of the Christian era. One reason for this was the demand from the two major empires that arose at the beginning of the Christian era. In the west was the mighty Roman Empire, while in the east was the Han Empire in China. Information about the period is thus available in many foreign sources. One of the works that tells us a great deal about early maritime trade is the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. This Greek text was written by an anonymous sailor in the 1st century AD and contains an account of the ports that he visited during his travels between the Red Sea and India. He also know of the commodities that were traded at each port from his account. We also know of the commodities that were traded at each port from his account. The two major ports to which trade goods were sent from the centers of the North India were those of the Babari Cone at the mouth of the Indus and Bharuch at the mouth of the Narmada. We have already referred to the routes along the Indus that connected Babari Cone with Punjab and Gandhar. Bharuch, or Barigaza as the Greeks called it, was linked to Ujjain, Mathura and the Ganga plains. In the east, Tamluk was an important outlet for coastal trade with Andhra and Tamil coasts. The Periplus tells us that the imports in the north included brocades, coral, frankincense, glass vessels, money, and some wine. The Romans are famous for the technological improvements that they made in the manufacture of glass. As a result, the different varieties of glass objects made by them were highly valued in many countries, including India and China. Frankincense is a gum resin produced by a tree indigenous to Arabia. It was used as an incense and also for medicinal purposes. So far, very few gold and silver Roman coins have been found in North India, although, as you will read in the next block, a large number of them have been found in peninsular India. This has led some scholars to suggest that these imported coins were melted and reused by the Kushanas and Kshatraps to mint their own currency. In exchange for these, the exports from India were spices, precious stones like turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian, and Chinese silk and yarn. We should not assume from here that trade was controlled by the Roman merchants only. There were many partners in this trade, including the Arabs, Jews, Oriental Greeks, and Roman subjects based in Egypt. In addition, Indian seamen sailed in their own ships to the ports of the Red Sea. The Jatakas narrate several stories of Indian merchants who undertook long sea voyages in order to make money. This is also corroborated by references in the Arthashastra of Kautilya and by inscriptions. Among the donors at Buddhist monasteries, an important category is that of the Navik or mariner. One category of goods that requires explanation is Chinese silk and yarn. Why was Chinese silk traded through India rather than being sent directly? The reason for this was the political situation. The Parthians were powerful rulers along the northwestern boundary of the Indian subcontinent. There was constant hostility between them and the Roman Empire, and as a result, overland routes between China and the west were disrupted. Many of the products from China were hence traded along the land route to India. Information about early contacts between India, Central Asia, and China is to be found in Chinese histories written at this time. It is generally accepted that, together with merchants, Buddhism also spread to Central Asia and China around the 1st century BC. 1st century BC to 1st century AD. A series of Buddhist caves were made along the northern route to Central Asia from the 1st century AD onwards, and from the 3rd century AD, many Buddhist texts were translated into Chinese. So far, we have said very little about early trade with countries in the Southeast Asia, such as Burma, Thailand, and Indonesia. This is because no early written texts are available in these countries, unlike the situation in the Roman and the Chinese empires. Hence, our only source of information are archaeological excavations. These show that many items of Indian workmanship, such as seals and beds of semi-precious stones, ivory comb, etc., were treasured and valued by Southeast Asian communities at this time. But in the absence of written records, it is difficult to say much more about the organization of trade in the early centuries of the Christian era. Principal trade routes. Bactria in the Oxus Valley in North Afghanistan was the main center of the international trade with Central Asia and China. From this city, a route ran through Kapisha and the Kabul Valley to the core region of the Kushan Empire. Within the Indian subcontinent, there were two major routes mentioned in different sources. The Uttar Path, or northern route, connected the major centers of the north, while the Dakshin Path linked the centers of the peninsular India. The Uttar Path originated at Pushkalavati, or modern Charsad, and went via Takshila, Mathura, Kausambi, and Varanasi to Pataliputra, and from there onwards to Champa and Chandraketugad. This ancient route was already in existence under the Mauryas, and references to it occur in Greek writings. From Mathura, another route branched off westward to Sindh, and it was along this route that horses were brought to the north. Mathura was also connected to Ujjain and the port of Bharuch at the mouth of the Narmada. A third route can run parallel to the river Indus and connected Takshila to Patal at the mouth of the river. A point to be noted here is that the major route followed the channel of the Ganga, and there are many references to the transportation of commodities by boat along the river. This major route was linked to several minor routes, one of them going past Vaishali and Shravasti to Nepal. Urban centers. We get information about the urban centers of North India from descriptions found in early Pali and Sanskrit texts, but many of these descriptions are of a rather general nature. The best sources for the purpose, however, are archaeological excavations conducted at the important urban sites. These tell us in detail about the way the houses were constructed and the implements and other artifacts used by the people who lived there. Excavations at Takshila, 30 km northwest of the modern Islamabad, were conducted mainly decades ago by Sir John Marshall. The excavation started in 1913 and continued for nearly 20 years. These showed that Takshila had been occupied from at least the Mauryan period onwards, though it was under the Indo-Greeks that the first planned city developed. A fortification wall was added later to the city. Fortification walls have been identified at many other sites also, but generally these were made of clay and well-rammed mud. The use of burnt brick was known, and it was widely employed for various structures. Circular structures, on the other hand, were made of wedge-shaped brick. As compared to the Mauryan period, houses of the early historical period were better made, and there was extensive use of burnt brick for walls and tiles for roofs. Artifacts of material culture found during excavation show that the settlements were more prosperous than those of the early period. A large number of beds were found, suggesting the increased use of ornaments and jewelry. Clay was used in a variety of ways. It was required for making pots, and in addition was employed for modeling human and animal figurines. Some of these figures were produced in molds and show intricate carvings and detailed ornamentation. Another point to be noted is the increase in the number of urban centers. Excavations have revealed many flourishing settlements such as Purana Kila, Mathura, and Kausambi on the banks of the Yamuna. Aishatra in Bareilly district was the capital of the North Panchalas. Rajghat in Varanasi has provided evidence for ivory working and the manufacture of textiles at this time. Vaishali, identified with the present-day Vaishali in North Bihar, yielded a large number of clay seals and ceilings, many of them belonging to traders and artisans. Two important sites in Bengal were Tamluk and Chandraketugarh. Excavations at Chandraketugarh show that the site was surrounded by a mud rampart in the early centuries AD, while Tamluk was a port town providing an outlet to traffic along the Ganga. Further west was a fortified settlement at Ujjain, which was also famous for its bed making industry. In addition, excavations at all these sites have uncovered remains of extensive brick walls and other structures. Next, a role of religion in trade. We had earlier mentioned that Buddhism provided encouragement to traders and was also patronized by a large number of occupational groups. We get information on this from inscriptions found at several Buddhist sites. These are records of donations made by kings as well as by a cross section of population. We also know that the important Buddhist monasteries were located along the trade routes at this time. A major center was the region around Takshila, where several Buddhist monasteries were located. Here, a distinct style of art known as Gandhara art developed under the Kushanas. A second stronghold of Buddhism was the region around Mathura, which was equally famous as a center of art also. Here, however, both Buddhism and Jainism were patronized, and excavations have unearthed both Buddhist and Jain monastic remains. Another large Buddhist centers were at Sanchi near present-day Bhopal. Merchants from many centers in the Deccan and North traveled to Sanchi and made donations, their inscriptions being significant indicators of roots. The major share of the money for building the stupa at Sanchi was provided by the residents of Ujjain. Also in central India was the stupa at the Barhat. Here donations were made by the residents of Nasik in the Deccan as well as by those of the Patliputra and Vaishali in the north. These are the inland trade routes 200 BC to 300 AD. मेन सिटीज़ ट्राइंगल में है, ठीक है। इसको फ़ोटो सेट करा के चिपका लो दीवार पे और बार बार देखो। These donations of money and land added to the wealth of the monasteries and led to a change in the role of Buddhist Sangha in the society. When Buddhism originated around the 5th century BC, monks led a very simple life. With the growth of the influence of Buddhism, specific groups of Buddhist sects and teachers became very wealthy. Thus, by the Kushana period, we find that certain Buddhist monastic centers possessed money and land, and there are many instances of monks and nuns themselves making donations of money. One of the reasons for the division of Buddhist Sangha was the dispute that arose about the interpretation of certain rules. There was an ongoing debate about whether monks could own property or not. Another question was about the deification of Buddha and the worship of his image. Deification. By the 1st century AD, the Buddhist Sangha had split into two major schools known as Mahayana and Hinayan. Of these two, the Hinayan was the more conservative. But what is important for our purpose is that the worship of the Buddha image led to an increase in ritual observances. Monasteries now required oil for lighting, lamps, incense for fragrance, and silk banners for decorating the stupas. Once monks started living permanently in monasteries, they required clothes. They now owned land and money and were no longer dependent on begging for their food and other necessities. Thus, gradually, they became one of the major consumers of many of the items traded at this time. Up till now, we have talked only about Buddhism and Jainism. What about Brahmanism or Hinduism? There are references in inscriptions to money given to feed Brahmins and to the performance of Vedic sacrifices. Early images of Shiva and Vishnu dated to the Kushan period have also been found. But the structure and form of the Brahmanical temple developed mainly from the Gupta period onwards, and it was later that the temple became the nucleus of the activity in society. Position of traders. Brahmanical texts in Sanskrit of the early century AD divide society into four categories, that is Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Sudra. Agriculture and trade was generally prescribed to the Vaishya, though the profession of the artisans was associated with the Sudra. As contrasted to this, early Buddhist texts refer to a variety of ways in which society could be divided. In addition to the Varna or caste hierarchy, They also mention distinctions on the basis of work and craft. Here, the division is on the basis of high and low. Agriculture, trade, and cattle keeping were considered high work. Thus, in many Buddhist texts, young men of good family are always assured with agriculture, trade, and cattle keeping. Similarly, accounting and writing are rated high among crafts, while leather working, basket making, weaving, etc. are considered low. On the whole, in Buddhist society, identification was on the basis of occupations, and traders has a high place in society. We find this reflected in the inscriptions as well. The donors at the Buddhist monastic sites mention only their occupations, and nowhere does the caste affiliation figure. Traders and merchants are prominently represented, and guilds occur in their own right. Let us sum up. To sum up, the period from 200 BC to AD 300 was perhaps the most prosperous in terms of the expansion of trade networks and increase in the number of urban centers. The major routes in the North India connected the centers in the northwest with ports along the Bengal coast. Linked to this were several feeder routes and the southern route that led to the Deccan and South India. In addition to urban centers, Buddhist monastic establishments were also located along these routes. This was because of the supportive role that Buddhism played at this time. Buddhism encouraged the accumulation and investment of wealth in trading ventures, and at the same time, the Sangha benefited from donations of land and money made by the devotees. This was also the period of increased demand from foreign markets, especially those of the Mediterranean region. Trade contacts with Central Asia and China opened up routes for the spread of Buddhism, and several Buddhist monasteries were carved in rock along the routes. Links with Southeast Asia were also being forged, and archaeological excavations are providing increased evidence of these.